Welcome back. This time, it's about recognizing allusions, but in poetry. Now, sometimes in poetry, allusions are quite easy to spot and to integrate into our understanding of a poem. However, sometimes there are multiple allusions and multiple references used within a poem, and we call that a conflation of references, which means that simultaneously references are used from several sources. Now, that can make it quite complicated to unravel, but once we do manage to unravel that, you'll just see how the layers of meaning actually just come out naturally. And it's quite an interesting journey. So we're going to look at a poem, or parts of a poem, in which this method is used to very, very great effect. And it is a poem by Auden, W.H. Auden. It's called Musée des Beaux-Arts. It means the Museum of Fine Arts. And already in the name, there is an allusion. Because in 1938, Auden went to the Musée, which is in Brussels, and he was intrigued by the work of the old masters, especially Bruegel. And he studied their poetry, their paintings, and he used what he got from those paintings in this poem. And it's more about his recollection of what he got to know about the old masters there. But you're going to see how many allusions you can actually pick out in this poem. Now, a very interesting thing also to remember is that the allusions used in this poem, they span from no time, the time of legends, once upon a time, those times, of legend, through the beginning of the Common Era, right? It's the birth of Christ, through the 16th century, that is, and also specifically Bruegel's time, which was also the time of the Spanish Inquisition, to modern times, because remember, he went into this arts museum in 1938. So to modern times, because now remember, he's also referring to his visit to the Musée, right, in 1938. So you can see how time is spanned through allusions in this poem. Now, you can guess, and I'm sure you have already guessed, that the use of the allusions in this specific poem is going to give this poem a certain universal appeal. Because the central theme in this poem is suffering versus indifference. Suffering versus indifference. Now, from no time to modern times to all times, there has been suffering. Am I right? Now, the old masters had a certain idea about how mankind will always show that they are indifferent. In essence, in their deepest essence, they are really indifferent to the suffering that they see going on around them. So, let's look a bit at the allusions that we can look for in this poem. So we look at the great masters, particularly Peter Bruegel, a Dutch painter, Flemish painter, who lived from 1520, in other words, the 16th century, 1520 to 1569. And then we are going to look at, in other words, the paintings of the master. We are going to look to allusions to paintings that he viewed in the Musée. And one painting, such painting, is directly referred to, remember the definitions, a direct reference, and that is the fall of Icarus. And the other two are indirectly mentioned, and I'm going to show you how that works. And it all had to do with the paintings that he saw and studied in the musée. So there are paintings then, allusions in musée. Within the paintings, remember, that he studied, he alludes to his visit to the musée. He alludes to the paintings of the old masters. And then within the paintings that he saw, there are certain other allusions. Now, in the one that's directly referenced is the legend of the fall of Icarus. We've already perhaps mentioned that. But Icarus, of course, is also from an ancient Greek legend, and we'll talk about that in a minute. There is not a reference, an allusion to the numbering at Bethlehem, because we see Joseph and Mary arriving with the baby Jesus, which is the beginning of the Common Era. We also see the slaughtering of the innocents. That is the other painting being alluded to, which is also the beginning of the Common Era. In other words, that's a killing of the children by Nero. And now the Spanish Inquisition is brought into the slaughtering of the innocents. So the people slaughtering the innocents or the children are the people from the Spanish Inquisition, which is a very strange way of bringing contexts together because it spans different times in the history. So the Spanish Inquisition went on from 1478 until 1834 or thereabouts. And remember that the great masters lived in the 16th century, the 15th. So you can see how that influenced the great masters. So he brings in allusions from different times. And then there's also an indirect reference or an allusion to a well-known Flemish proverb, which says, "En de boer hy ploegte voort," meaning, and the farmer, he just carries on ploughing. Fine. So the first legend we have to take a closer look at is the legend of the fall of Icarus. It is, of course, an ancient Greek legend. Icarus was a son of Daedalus, and he was the architect of the elaborate labyrinth that he made for King Minos of Crete. And this labyrinth became one of the landmarks, one of the wonders of the ancient world. Now, after Daedalus created this labyrinth, what did the king do? He went and imprisoned Daedalus and his son in this labyrinth. So Daedalus made a plan, and he constructed wings for both himself and for his son, 2 pairs of wings. And he added feathers to a wooden frame. So, like any father would do, he cautioned his son. He said, "My son, fine, these are your wings, but be careful not to fly too close to the sun, because what would happen? The wax would melt and you would fall." And of course, like a typical teenager, what did Icarus do? He went flying too close to the sun. He forgot the warning, and he was ecstatic with his ability to fly. And of course, he went too close to the sun, and the wax started to melt. And what happened to poor Icarus? He plunged to his death into the ocean, and that is apparently how the Icarian Sea got its name. A typical legend, right? This is a legend of Icarus. Now, the direct reference here to Icarus, it's made directly in the poem, both in the title and in the poem itself, is the direct reference is this painting of Bruegel, where you see the farmer ploughing on, where you see the boat, we're going to talk about that just now, the boat sailing on, where we see poor old Icarus with his little feet in the water, drowning. Right. That is the one direct reference made. Now, he starts off his poem. I'm just going to look at the first part and the last part and then just refer to the other two. In the first part of the poem, he says, as a comment on what he saw about the masters, about suffering, they were never wrong. In other words, the suffering depicted, look at poor Icarus there suffering and the innocents being slaughtered, etc. They were never wrong, the old masters. Those were the ones who were never wrong. How well they understood its human position. How it takes place while someone else is eating or opening a window or just walking dully along. So in other words, suffering is part of our everyday lives. He then goes on in the next part, which I'm not quoting here, he alludes, now in other words, an indirect reference is made here to two other pictures of Bruegel. The one is the massacre of the innocents. As I said, if you have a chance, look at it more closely, and you're going to see that the massacre takes place with soldiers being dressed like people from the Spanish Inquisition. They're killing people there. But look at the landscape. The landscape is a typical Dutch or Flemish landscape. And the setting, of course, in Belgium, however, is just, it happens just shortly after the birth of Christ. And then also the census at Bethlehem, which is it's also in the time of the birth of Christ. And what he refers to here, he says, while all of this happened there, and the old people sat there and they were in agony waiting for Christ to be born. You know, the doggies did their doggy things and children ran around playing, blah, blah. Everything happened as normal. But there was great suffering underneath. So this then, as I said, is the one that the majority of the poem is about. In the last part, he goes on to say, in Bruegel's Icarus, for instance. So can you see how he directly now refers to this picture, right? In Bruegel's Icarus, for instance, how everything turns away quite leisurely from the disaster. There's a disaster going on. Icarus is drowning. There's a child falling from the sky, drowning in the sea. There's a boat. There's a ploughman. There are people around. Why didn't they see? Why didn't they hear the splash? He says, the ploughman may have heard the splash, the forsaken cry, but for him, it was not an important failure. This failure to fly, it was not an important failure. The sun shone. It was an ordinary day. The sun shone as it had to, on the white legs disappearing into the green. So look how he says, the sun shone as it had to. So remember, he said that he agrees with the old master, that suffering goes on all the time and we don't even notice. And it's as though it just has to be. On the white legs disappearing into the green water. And the expensive ship, there it is, that must have seen something amazing. A boy falling out of the sky had somewhere to go to, or to get to, and sailed calmly on. So I hope it has become clear to you how these various allusions that span across time, that span across countries and legends and stories, how they all work together to give you the idea that suffering will always go hand in hand with indifference. It doesn't matter when it is. It is part of the human condition. And as we said in the beginning, he said about suffering, they were never wrong. It always just happened like that. I leave you with this food for thought. And next time, I'll see you again.